I'm thinking about the nearly 90,000 Black
Yes.
children, but the hundreds of thousands of innocent children who could be facing similar circumstances. So tell me your story.
So my story, I've always had child protective services in my life from the time that I can remember, for my siblings and I. It was always like kind of like the norm. So I would say the last couple of months that I was with my biological parents, it was the beatings were extremely bad. Physical beatings, mental, emotional. I also experienced molestation growing up. So it was just a lot of things that I was trying to run away from, but also trying to seek help. But I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what that outlook was. So I blame my biological mother a lot because I just couldn't understand, like, as a mother, how could you allow your children to be put through so much harm? And it was one of those things where one day I just made the phone call. I called 911. And I remember being in the closet and I remember just crying and crying and crying. And my sisters locked the door so that way my parents couldn't get in. And I called and I was like, you guys need to come to the house. He's beating us. He's beating us. And then that same day, the phone cord line got cut. And from there, they sent out investigators. They came to the house. But at this point, we had a number of open cases. So it was to the point where they did their check. They looked around and they were like, okay, everything is fine. So at that point, I just felt hopeless because I'm like, how many times do I have to call, or does a teacher have to report that they seen a bruise or that something is not right with these children before somebody actually steps in? So that's where a lot of my resentment for the child welfare system started to come in later too. But it wasn't to the point where I just was very persistent. And I will never forget the day that I called my grandmother and I was just like, hey, can you pick up me and the girls? We just want to come over and sleep over. But my father never wanted us to sleep over at anyone's house because he had no control of us, what we would say, what we would do. And this day, I remember getting in my grandmother's car and just telling her to drive and crying and crying and crying. My younger siblings are looking confused, and especially the youngest one because she's the closest to our mother and she doesn't know what that aspect is like. She's not understanding right from wrong. Only way that we learned that what we're going through is wrong because I would go to school and I'm like, your parents don't beat you. You're not going through this. So it was one of those things where I was like, just drive. And I just remember just telling her everything and like crying to her. And she was just like, you guys are not leaving. So from there, they opened up a case in the state of New Jersey. They opened up a case. They started doing investigations and everything. And it was just so much for them to like unpack that it was like, there's no way that we're giving you back to your biological parents. But at the time, it was 5 of us entering the child welfare system. So it was unheard of for siblings to stay together. It's usually 2 siblings in this foster home, 2 siblings in this home, and 1 maybe independent living. And that was something that I just fought tooth and nail, that I wanted to stay with my siblings because I did not know life without them. I looked at them like they were my children, even though I was a kid myself. So it was something that I fought my social workers on, I fought my caseworkers on, but I had this one CASA worker, and I love her to death, Marla Higginbotham, and their entire team, where I sat down and for the first time, somebody asked me like who I was or what I wanted to be or where I saw myself. So regardless of all the traumas that I had endured and I was trying to come to terms with and all the aspects of violation, because when they do an investigation, you also got to be examined by random people. You have no clothes on. You're stripped of all sense of identity. And sometimes I feel like the foster care system also dehumanizes young people even more. So you're coming from a traumatic situation just to be re-traumatized again. And that aspect of it, I was like, if I'm going to go through it, I'm going to go through it with my siblings. And that plays a huge part in why I was a part of the drafting and creating the Sibling Bill of Rights in New Jersey, because I feel like that shouldn't be something that somebody's fighting for. It should be a right.
Of course.
So that led me into the foster care system. And then within the system, I was very active in going to the courts. I was the young person that they always say, you talk too much, you run your mouth too much. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to use it for good. I'm going to go to the courthouse and tell them what I want and what's going on. So I was very vocal. I testified in my case, had to testify against my parents who were testifying against me at 12 years old. So it was just unheard of territory that I was like continuously embarking on. And my younger siblings looked to me to be the voice for us. So essentially, I would say that worked in a positive for me because I was able to find my voice. So from there, I joined the New Jersey Youth Council. I was a youth council member for 2 years. I became a youth council coach. Aside from that, I started doing full-time advocacy work. So I just started sharing my story. I started leading youth groups, empowering young people, because I feel like the biggest thing that I missed throughout being in care and going through all the things and that lack of stability or normalcy was just understanding that I'm a person and that I'm not a product of the child welfare system, that I'm not another statistic, that everybody that said I couldn't and I wouldn't, that I was going to do just that. So that was something that empowered me, but it's also because I had great people in my life, and not necessarily my social workers. Unfortunately, it was my CASA workers that stepped up and took that position. So I did all the things. We ended up getting adopted. I ended up experiencing a failed adoption because I ended up going back into the system, and I recently aged out in January of this year. So I did a few years of independent living. So I've experienced
A lot.
a lot.
A lot.
When you
yeah.
say, just so I'm aware,
Mhm.
CASA worker, that is.
So that's a court appointed advocate that is a volunteer. So they're in a lot of states. Some states may call them a GAL, but in New Jersey, they're called CASA workers, well, CASA volunteers. So for me, it was my CASA volunteers because they always stuck around. So even the time where my case closed, my CASA volunteer was the one that moved me into college, that bought me my LSAT books when I graduated college. I just actually went to dinner with her not too long ago. So she's always the one that's just been like encouraging me and empowering me to kind of take ownership of my life and my story, and not just stay fixated on all the things that went wrong, but what I could do with that. So I really use my platform of advocacy to empower young people, because sometimes it's not even about what I necessarily been through. It's about what I've been through and how I could use that to help you or empower you.
Yeah.
So that's been good.